why and how I decided to leave the Jehovah's Witnesses. Today in this video, I don't want to talk about sales techniques. I don't want to talk about high ticket. I simply want to share a part of my story, specifically my past in the world of Jehovah's Witnesses. And I want to do it through a video because as people get to know me, as my students come to understand who I am and what I can do, there arises the need to understand where I come from, the context in which I developed my skills, the environment in which I was trained, or where most of who I am today was shaped. Telling it through a video will therefore also allow me to calmly describe many details. 25 years is the span of time during which I remained within the Jehovah's Witnesses. A period that goes from 1990 to 2015. In this period of time, naturally, a truly significant way of thinking takes root. And above all, why does someone decide to leave after 25 years, a quarter of a century? Well, there are three factors that led me to leave, the last of which, however, was the most disgusting of all. The last one is the most shameful thing I could have ever witnessed, and of course I will talk about it now. But first, I need to make a big preface. Before I show the reasons that led me to leave the Witnesses and how I did it, it's only right to explain why and how I got involved in the first place. No one would ever want to join a sect, a religious cult. No sane person would say, I choose to voluntarily join a close group. No one would voluntarily say, I want to be brainwashed. No one. And no Jehovah's Witness who has voluntarily entered the world of Jehovah's Witnesses did so because they woke up one morning and said, you know what, today I decide to become a Jehovah's Witness. So how is it possible for someone to choose to join a group like this? This applies to Jehovah's Witnesses, but it also applies to any other type of group. It applies to Scientology, to Dianetics, so it applies to the Evangelical Church, to the Adventists, to the Pentecostals. It applies to Muslims, it applies to the Catholic Church, it applies to anything. It's not like someone suddenly wakes up fully aware of the desire to become Muslim or anything else. There is a mechanism. So what is it that drives a person who wouldn't want to do something to make a completely opposite choice? And above all, everyone who approaches these kinds of worlds or groups out of curiosity does so already with the preconception and especially with the intention of saying, I don't want to become one of them, and above all, I don't want to go out and preach, for example. Jehovah's Witnesses are famous for ringing doorbells as part of their door-to-door preaching. And yet, promptly, after just 6 months of someone starting to get curious, they quickly become a skilled proclaimer of this message, of their message, and thus a promoter of the message that encourages others in turn to join. This is a video I wanted to make a long time ago, but I'm only making it now because if I had done it earlier, I would have heard someone. Or rather, I was a Jehovah's Witness until 2015. But the one who remained a witness in my family was my father, who passed away in 2023. If I had made this video while he was still alive, I would have heard him. Since my father, along with my mother, was one of the most important people in my life, I didn't want to hurt him. Even though the message I want to share is one that isn't harmful at all, I have no desire to wage war against Jehovah's Witnesses, nor do I intend to stir up controversy against an organization, because I have my own life, my own goals, and my own dreams to fulfill. But the interpretation he would have given it could have hurt him. So I didn't want to hurt him. And another reason is that sharing something so personal, because it is a very personal part of my life, a quarter of a century spent within a group that is notorious for ruining people's lives is complicated. Admitting that you've been an idiot is not easy. Admitting that you've made mistakes is not an easy thing. But with this video, I absolutely want to clear up any doubts and give people a way to understand the choices I've made, where I come from, and as I've already mentioned. So why did I join the Witnesses and how did I get involved with them? Let's answer this question by also explaining why an ordinary person who knows about this group or other similar groups or other sects ends up falling into the trap and joins these groups voluntarily. So the Jehovah's Witnesses are a group that, first of all, defines itself as Christian, and in opposition to the Catholic Church, claims to tell, explain, and teach the truth regarding God's purpose as contained in the Bible. Therefore, Jehovah's Witnesses claim to adhere strictly and scrupulously to the Bible be Bible. We mean both the Old Testament and the New Testament, so the collection of books that make up the Holy Scriptures. They claim to be the official spokespeople of God and to represent His name. For them, Jehovah is the proper name of God, just as my name is Corrado, and they identify this as God's actual name. Being a Jehovah's Witness, therefore, means strictly adhering to the interpretation that this organization gives of the Bible. Therefore, it means doing the exact opposite of what a normal person would do be normal. Of course, I mean, someone who bases their actions on the morals and ethics of society. In a Catholic country like Italy, it's normal to celebrate Christmas, it's normal to celebrate birthdays, it's normal to celebrate name days, it's normal to celebrate Easter and New Year's Eve. It's normal, so to speak. To spend time with people of the opposite sex. It's normal to do a whole series of things that make up the objective life we can live in our country. From north to south, east to west, small details may change, but by and large, that's how it is. And no matter how much someone might call themselves non-Catholic or atheist, living in a context like this means adopting a lifestyle that is close to and steeped in Catholic culture. For a Jehovah's Witness, it's not like that. A Jehovah's Witness does not celebrate Christmas, does not celebrate New Year's Eve, does not celebrate birthdays, does not celebrate Easter, or any kind of holiday. So a birthday is seen as just an ordinary day, no gifts, no celebrations, no cake. When a child goes to school and classmates bring pastries, he has to refrain from eating them. So I remember when I went to school and I would refrain from eating the pastries my classmates brought. Even though they invited me to, even though the teachers encouraged it, I would isolate myself because I was taught by this organization to isolate myself. Another thing, Jehovah's Witnesses feel chosen, favored, selected. Chosen by what? So let's make a diagram to clarify. Jehovah's Witnesses need to be distinguished in two ways. On one hand, there's the organization. And by organization, we mean the hierarchical, political, and administrative structure of those who lead and control the group. On the other hand, there are the members. The organization sets the rules. The organization claims to be sent by God, to be inspired by God. So it self-proclaims and self-legitimizes itself as the leader. And the members must comply with the organization's rules. If you don't do what is required, you are expelled. What does expulsion entail? So if I stay within the rules, then yes, okay. If not, expulsion in essence means facing what is commonly called ostracism. Ostracism, or a form of social exile, is a severe consequence. I don't know if ostracism is spelled with two C's. I can't remember. So ostracism or exile means that all contact with the community is cut off, every kind of contact. Work relationships are cut off, family relationships are cut off, and even greetings are withdrawn. They stop greeting you. When someone leaves the community, even if they're still living in the same house with other members, let's say a husband decides to leave the community, even though he and his wife still live together, she no longer greets him. She doesn't speak to him anymore. If a child leaves the community and maybe lives alone and calls their parents because they need something, Jehovah's Witnesses educational videos, which is how most of their propaganda is spread, through videos show that the parents should not answer the phone. That is a person who has grown up their entire life in this community and therefore hasn't formed, because they've been told not to, hasn't formed relationships outside the community. So they don't eat with classmates during birthday parties. They don't hang out with them after school because it's better to avoid it. When I work, I avoid spending time with coworkers, with colleagues, because I'm not supposed to form friendships with them. I can form only the relationships that are absolutely necessary. And for what purpose? To bring them into the community but I always have to be careful not to go any further. So no interpersonal relationships, especially with people of the opposite sex. This means not dating or spending time with people of the opposite sex who are not witnesses. And if I do date someone, it has to be within the witnesses. So if I want to find a partner, I have to find one among the witnesses, and I can't have sexual relations with him or her unless we're married. These are the rules. The penalty is expulsion. If I have built my whole life, my life has been created within the community without any outside relationships, it's clear that if I get expelled or if I choose exile because I no longer feel comfortable inside, I find nothing outside. I have no friends, no relationships, I'm at zero. There are people who commit suicide in these circumstances, because the psychological pressure is so intense that bearing it is extremely difficult. On top of that, I'm in a community where I'm subjected to constant propaganda, and by constant, I mean every single day, day after day, I'm encouraged not to study anything that isn't produced by the organization. So the organization produces its own publications, whether they are books, magazines, or various other periodicals. Everything the organization says, since they have to proclaim themselves as God's messengers, obviously, the publications they create are self-referential. So if I were to read something not created by them, it would dismantle their whole construct. So what do? In their propaganda, they discourage people from continuing their studies. So after finishing compulsory schooling, you're told not to pursue further education, not to build a career in sports, not to build a career in the working world, because your goal should be to preach and to contribute your money so that the organization can continue to expand and grow. So a sophisticated mechanism is carefully created where individuals are subtly led to think in a particular predetermined direction. Everything that is created, moreover, is virus-proof. That is, since I am the one spreading the message, I will make sure so that people remain attached to method, discourage them from thinking, to discourage them from seeking information, to discourage them whenever someone tries to undermine their attachment to me. Therefore, in the propaganda, efforts will be made to prepare people. And this is exactly what is done, so that if anyone tries to make them think or help them realize that they are making a mistake or that the truth is not found here, their minds will be led to shut down and not listen to the message. Earlier I was saying, how is it possible that someone who doesn't wake up in the morning and choose to become a Jehovah's Witness suddenly decides to become one? The lever that the witnesses use is twofold. First, we show you what the Bible really teaches, because the Catholic Church doesn't teach you how to read the Bible. It claims to be, I'm not criticizing the Catholic Church here, I don't care about that, I'm just explaining what the message is. The Catholic Church tells you that it is the spokesperson of Christ, of God on earth, but it never actually shows you the Bible. So you have to rely on what they tell you, on traditions. Instead, we open the Bible for you and let you read directly from the Bible what? The teachings of God. So a person who has, so to speak, grown up in a context that defines itself as Christian Catholic, as the spokesperson of God, opens the Bible for the first time, and someone shows them, for example, let's give an example, that the use of images as worship is not acceptable. This automatically destroys their previous belief and makes them say, at this point, you are not the close group I thought you were. I would like to study the Bible more deeply. So that's the first element. Second crucial element. They meticulously use the sacred Bible to carefully create the profound idea that there is a truly significant message of eternal life. That is to say, they skillfully lead people to genuinely believe that there will indeed be the distinct possibility of seeing the deceased physically resurrect and return to life on this very planet. Therefore, those who have lost a loved one and cannot find peace, because clearly, if we lose a parent, a child, a sibling, or a partner, meaning a husband or wife, we cannot find peace. Hearing someone tell us, look, soon God will resurrect that person and you will be able to embrace them again, what happens clearly? It triggers the confirmation bias in our minds. Confirmation bias is a mental trap that we create for ourselves when we want to believe in something. We look for confirmations that can support that belief. but it is our own mind that deceives us. And someone might say, yes, but the Catholic Church teaches the same thing. No, the Catholic Church does not teach that the resurrection will be here on this planet. It teaches that it will be in the kingdom of God, and the kingdom of God will be in heaven. Muslims also believe in a resurrection. In all cultures, there is this idea of an immortal soul, of a soul that we might see the dead again, and so on. But Jehovah's Witnesses capitalize on this, and to do so, they create images, they craft a message that can support this idea. Adventists also believe in the same thing. Now, why do I say that it's propaganda and not true? Because if we read the Bible, I'll make a video dedicated to the Bible. I will in which I'll actually show you what the Bible says, and I'll do it by also debunking what Biglino says. So I'll be so eager to do it and to give you a message so full of information that I might even enrich Biglino's message. Biglino is similar. Now, as I was saying, the strength lies in this. Why is there this message? The message doesn't originate from Jehovah's Witnesses. It actually started even earlier with the Adventist Church. But in reality, it comes from a poet, it should be Milton, who, at the end of the 19th century, wrote a work called Paradise Lost, Paradise Regained. And he gave the Bible this interpretation of the message, that there was a sin to be corrected through the death of Jesus. And from Jesus' death, the possibility of having a new world, a perfect world, where there would be no sickness, death, destruction, wars, plagues, or any of the rest. Now, the propaganda within the community is negative. It is a constant state of terror. That is, every day there is propaganda about the fact that God will intervene because humanity has reached the point of no return, because there is suffering, there are only problems. In other words, if we watch the news is always negative. The news programs do audience ratings because they constantly report negative and tragic information. Well, negative and tragic information keeps people in a state of fear and terror. So people are paralyzed, they don't make choices, they rarely buy a house, they rarely change jobs, they rarely take bold decisions or make investments. Why is that? Because there is a deliberate intention to keep them stuck. The power of propaganda is extremely strong. Do you want proof of this? Do you want proof? The COVID vaccinations. Another example is the Russia-Ukraine war. Propaganda is constantly present there. Moreover, these days, in these months, propaganda is working to get us used to the idea of war, to the fact that we might receive nuclear bombs on our country, but the fact that this war is being promoted by the United States is not shown. Putin is always portrayed as dark, ugly, and evil, while the others are angelic. And if we wanted to look at things objectively, distancing ourselves from ordinary communications, we would notice that things are not like that. But propaganda leads us to think so, and to get used to these things, to follow the information and the orders that are given to us. So anyone who says, maybe, no, not me, I will never fall into the traps of witnesses, know that you have already fallen into a trap. You have fallen into the trap, into believing that you could only do one job or pursue only one career. You have fallen into the trap of thinking that you had to study in order to earn more. You have fallen into the trap of thinking that the religion you follow must be followed without question, or that yours is the right one, whether you are Catholic, Muslim, and so on. If we think about Muslims, what they do is even worse. Okay, now the propaganda promoted within this community is 100 times more negative than ordinary news broadcasts. So people are led not to study, not to have children, because they have to dedicate their time to preaching, not to pursue a career, but to commit themselves as much as possible to preaching and bringing in new followers. And above all, there is a terrifying obsessive fixation on sex. So a young person growing up and going through puberty, when hormones are surging and not just hormone S is made to feel guilty if they want to masturbate or if they do masturbate, he becomes obsessed with guilt and will grow up with this sense of guilt to the point that he will develop issues with sexual repression, which he will likely express in adulthood in unhealthy ways. So why did I choose to come in here, given that things are like this? I have nothing against the members. In fact, I feel sorry for them. Some of them have chosen, but unfortunately, part of them is too naive to realize they're in a trap. The witnesses have also, among other things, made attempts in recent years, ever since the spread of the internet and social networks has allowed information to emerge. And so, to put it that way, there has been an exodus of people from this group. They have consistently tried to make changes by significantly loosening the existing rules and regulations, but these adjustments will never be truly enough to effectively keep people within their confines. Some of them will undoubtedly stay inside because they are either far too incredibly naive, indeed profoundly naive, or perhaps even too profoundly arrogant to genuinely admit that they were fundamentally wrong. So as I was saying, I joined in 1990, not because I chose to enter the world of the witness essence. I didn't even know who they were, but simply because the strength of the witnesses lies in their network, in their relationships. So if I have to go out and preach in a city, on a street, and try to approach strangers and convince them to join the community, it will be much harder for me to convert someone if this person is close to me, either as a family member or as a friend. I joined the Jehovah's Witnesses to follow my father, who never would have thought of joining the witnesses. But in 1990, he lost his parents. So within just a few days, he lost both his father and mother after a long, difficult period of caring for them, a time that was hard, full of tension with my mother because of work, debts, and all sorts of problematious psychological pressure. Just couldn't take it anymore. My grandmother, his mother, had already been a Jehovah's Witness for a few years. She became a witness because my father's brother, who had moved to Canada at the end of the 1960s, had become a Jehovah's Witness there. So brother, mother, another son. From son to me, my mother never became a Jehovah's Witness. So in 1990, my father lost his parents. I'll keep it short, otherwise it would be too long. He held a funeral trying to respect my grandmother's wishes, so according to what she wanted. During this funeral period, he received what is the strong weapon of the Jehovah's Witnesses: the message of the Bible, the idea of eternal life, of a resurrection of the dead. But above all, cults are powerful for one thing: the famous love bombing. Every cult brings people in and attracts them through a bomb of affection. My father, during that difficult period, lost his parents, was under pressure from many things, improper work, my mother's debts from her business, and so on. He found himself being warmly welcomed by this group of people whom he had previously judged to be not good people, but their actions and behavior broke down his defenses. He started spending time with them with the idea of wanting to learn more about what they were teaching. And I, living through a period of my childhood, I was 10 years old, in the 90s, practically never saw my parents. I would see them passing through the house because I had a couple of rooms above a restaurant that my mother managed. But I never had the idea of a family or a childhood. I never had the family gathered at home in the living room having dinner together. I didn't have that I would eat dinner alone in the restaurant. So as a child, I felt the absence of my parents. At school, I did terribly because I wasn't supervised, I wasn't managed at all. And a 10-year-old any child needs love, needs affection, needs attention, needs time and care from their parents, because these things don't come back later. Now, I miss my father a lot. And when he started spending time with the witnesses, I would see him leave in the evening. I didn't know where he was going. I saw him leave once, then twice, and then I saw a Bible appear in the house. I found out it was a Bible because I saw this book, this black book. I started leafing through it. And as a curious child, because I was always curious to read and learn things, I figured out that it was the Bible. I asked him if I could go with him one of the evenings when he would go out. Why? Because Jehovah's Witnesses have a very intense educational program. Today it's a bit less so. But in the 80s, 90s, and up until 2008, the program included 3 weekly meetings of 1 to 2 hours, so 5 hours in total, plus door-to-door preaching. And one evening, he let me go with him. I went with him, and I too entered this environment. Imagine a child who is always alone, whose only companion is the television. I was full of bad marks at school because I was doing poorly. I was criticized by my classmates because I was a loser. I found myself in an environment where I received a love bomb, an explosion of affection, and there I felt welcomed, cared for, and everything else. So my journey started, I grew into adolescence. I started making choices because I was convinced I had found the truth, because I was handling the Bible. I mean, in my 25 years, I read and studied the Bible, I don't know, 15 times, while I was with classmates who knew nothing about the Bible. My arrogance led me to say, I know what matters, you don't. So I grow up, I graduate from high school, but I don't choose to go to university. Problems with homosexuality, meaning the crisis of guilt I felt when I masturbated because my hormones were going crazy, but they told me it was a sin, that I shouldn't do it. Because there's this idea that if you even think about having relations with someone, you're already doing it, so you're a sinner. You shouldn't do it because God will destroy you. Things like that. Terrified. And I started working there too. I always have to be careful around my coworkers, not to get too close or anything like that. Some girl, a coworker, tries to get closer. Even though I was attracted, I had to turn down invitations, so I didn't see anyone. In the end, I found someone in the community. I got married in 2009. And a very difficult period began. What does that mean? It means that 2009. No, let's do it this way. 2009, marriage, a difficult period begins. Why? Because after 6 months, so at the end of 2009, I was fired. I was convinced I was doing well. I had my permanent job, my salary. I was working as a designer, but I was completely different from who I am now. So I was a closed-off person. I was always convinced that it was others who were wrong, because I grew up with the idea that I was always right, because I thought I had the truth in my pocket. I was also cut off from family relationships because my mother's sisters and brother, seeing the danger of the Jehovah's Witnesses community, severed all ties. So I didn't grow up with my uncles, aunts, and cousins like it would be in a normal family. It's true that not all families are close, but this is something I missed out on. I tried to rekindle those relationships, but it was never possible to build any real closeness. So we greet each other, but there's always an underlying awkwardness because we don't really know each other. I had a paternal uncle with whom I still have a great relationship, who was very smart, understood the situation, and looked beyond I became one of my most important mentors after my parents. So I found myself losing my job. My wife at the time had already lost her job. Why? Because in 2008, if you remember, there was the housing crisis, the subprime speculative bubble, and the economic collapse. I was laid off because the company made significant staff cuts and, of course, got rid of the most inconvenient people. I was inconvenient, I admit it. My wife had also lost her job because of the crisis, or let's just say crisis. A difficult period begins that lasts until 2011, surviving on benefits, unemployment support, odd jobs here and there, and so on. I can't manage to get back into the workforce. I can't find a job like the one I had before. But I still feel the pressure of being the head of the family. Why? Because in the Jehovah's Witnesses faith, there is a culture of male dominance, meaning women are considered inferior to men. They must submit to men's rules. They must submit to men's will. Now, I have never supported violence against the weak or against women. I hate those things. But I still felt the responsibility to provide for my family. And this sense of responsibility made me feel unwell because I couldn't find a proper source of income, just odd jobs here and there. And in 2011, I started getting into the world of sales. I started selling. I tried to follow in my father's footsteps since he had an agency. But the principal company refused to transfer my father's contract to me. So I made a few attempts with some IT products, but then in 2013, I started collaborating with a company in the financial sector and began selling financial products. What was the problem with sales? Well, the advantage of sales is that it's a market where there will always be a need for people. The only thing is, if you don't have a fixed salary, living on commission is tough. And I was living solely on commission. I didn't have any expense reimbursements. So I started a career in the world of sales, and I'm extremely happy about it because today I'm here teaching high-ticket sales. And in fact, I specialized in high-ticket sales, meaning selling at the highest possible market price without discounts, without offers, without quotes, and so on, because I found solutions to sell at higher prices. I developed a system, and today I teach it to others. But back then I was a beginner. I knew nothing about sales. I was still a Jehovah's Witness. So as a Jehovah's Witness, I had the responsibility to constantly attend meetings, continually study materials, and preach. Preaching meant, since you don't have an 8-hour work obligation, why not preach a bit more than the others? So I tried to preach at least 10 hours a week, which meant a couple of half days during the week, plus another half day on the weekend. I never saw anyone lining their pockets with money, but I believed in this. But if you do something and you don't see results, frustration starts to set in. I wasn't seeing any results. Yes, there were a few sales starting to happen, but nothing substantial. I wasn't bringing home enough to pay the rent, the bills, and everything else. My wife had started working in a factory, and she was the one supporting the family. I felt even more worthless. I know it doesn't make sense if you're a couple, you work together, you share everything and all that, but my upbringing was different. On top of that, I felt pressure from her and from my parents to quit my job, especially from her parents who would say, Corrado, go back to a real job. So when I meet someone who's in sales and is really struggling and not earning enough, I know they're suffering, not so much because the money isn't coming in, because they're willing to settle. The real problem is dealing with the pressure that comes from in-laws, brothers-in-law, siblings, sisters-in-law, and so on. They criticize without knowing anything, okay? By the way, I'm someone in the community who carries a lot of responsibility. I'm not one of the official leaders, so I'm never formally named as one of those in charge. There are two classes of leaders, the elders and the ministerial servants. But let's not get into that. I don't feel like going into detail. Anyway, I'm called on to take on certain roles because they see me as a serious, reliable person. I got things done, as I was saying. But the pressure kept building. I suffered from insomnia for 5 years. From 2009 to 2015, I kept struggling with it. I couldn't sleep at night because the financial pressure was terrible. To give you an idea of how bad it was, I didn't even have enough money to buy myself a coffee at the bar. I couldn't always afford to get my car serviced, so I often had to do it myself. It was a heavy burden. So we get to 2014. I start having more success in sales, so I begin to make progress and develop a passion for selling. And above all, I start studying sales. I mean, I ask for help. I reach the point where I say, either I learn how to sell or I have to give up. And since I liked the job, I didn't want to give up. I started studying books, online courses, and so on. And that's when the first element emerged that led me to distance myself from the witnesses, although at the time I wasn't yet aware that it was the first element. By studying sales so much, I started to see the pattern, like in the Matrix. In the Matrix, at first, Neo isn't convinced that he's the chosen one. He's not convinced that he's in a fake world. But in the end, he starts to see the code behind things, the agents, the walls, and everything else. That's how it was for me. I had started to read the sales code of the Jehovah's Witnesses organization. By sales code, I mean that in the publications, I had started to break down the articles and realized that there was a propaganda system at work. They were written to scare people and push them to make a choice. But I was still innocent, in other words. I saw things in a positive light, saying, well, look how advanced we are as Jehovah's Witnesses. That's what I used to say. We use a sales system. Interesting, I used to say. I didn't see any malice in it. But then we get to 2015, the beginning of 2015, and the pressure is high because I'm still not earning enough. I've become passionate about sales, and I'm very stressed by the fact that within the community, there are people who are putting obstacles in my way. In other words, they make me feel like I should be preaching more and that I'm not preaching enough. There are tensions at home because there isn't enough money. I always fulfill my responsibilities to the best of my ability because that's the kind of person I am. When I do something, it's because I'm convinced about doing it. If I'm not convinced, I just can't do it. I can't do it. I can't pretend. I don't wear masks. I just can't tell someone you're great. If I can't stand them, I just can't do it. And what do I notice? I notice an inconsistency that I had always seen, but you reach a saturation point, an inconsistency between those in charge and those in charge, between what they say and what they do. That is, those who were in charge within the community, and I'm not talking about the top leaders, I'm talking about my own community, the Bassano de Graparia elders at the time, meaning the people who managed the community, people who in everyday life are nobodies. They don't have a job role because they never managed to build a career, frustrated by the fact that they don't have a career outside. What do? They exert their authority over the weaker ones, making their role felt. What do you mean by making their role felt? From the podium, instead of just starting, they have the habit of handing out orders and advice. But they're the first ones not to follow them themselves. At a certain point, what do? Tired of their inconsistency, and since I was the one busting my ass like crazy, I ended up one evening exhausted and pissed off, sending an email to all the elders saying, guys, you say we need to behave well, be honest, be hospitable to others, and teach by example. But first of all, you're the first ones to work off the books. Because while sex is condemned, 80% of those who eat the gelato work under the table. And they justify it by saying, well, I have to preach, which is the most important thing, so I have to please God rather than men. Second thing, you say we should be hospitable to people who are struggling. I am in extreme difficulty, and yet I am hospitable because every week I invite people over to my house, people who might be alone or in need. But I've never been to your house though. Then you tell me that I have to preach, so I'm always present at the group meetings, so I can... Group meetings are the organizational meetings to prepare for preaching, to be able to preach effectively. And I never see any of you there. The moral of the story is, after a few days, they remove me from all the positions of responsibility and exclude me from everything. In other words, they take away all the activities I was involved in, because there's this strategy among the witnesses. They take things away from you so that you feel the loss and come back to apologize. But what do I do instead? In 2015, I was studying sales, and I said to myself, since it's like this, I have free time to dedicate to sales. I throw myself into it headfirst. In fact, what do? I asked the best salespeople to let me shadow them, meaning to accompany them on sales calls to see how they did it. So first I asked the groups, the people closest to me that I knew. And once I've learned from everyone, what do I do next? I go to the number one in the company in all of Italy. Out of 65,000 salespeople, a woman sets the sales record. A woman not even 40 years old yet. I approach her and say, please, can you help me? I want to learn, you're the number one. She, as open and generous as she's always been, says yes, gladly, and starts to show me where I was making mistakes. And with her, a friendship develops, and then an increasingly close relationship. So I start to get attached on one hand. I had people telling me, you need to find a real job, you need to listen to your elders who are scolding you because you're too arrogant, and so on. On the other hand, I found someone who instead gave me satisfaction, said, look, you have a great attitude. If everyone were like you, we'd all be great salespeople. Really, you're very good. You have great potential. So she noticed qualities in me that I had always been inclined not to see. And above all, I never thought it would be possible for me one day to teach others, that is, to do the job I'm doing now. I never would have thought I could do it. I never would have thought I'd be an expert in e-ticketing, teaching, selling, training, traveling the world, selling abroad. I never would have thought I could do it. Because I had simply been stifled by this awful community. I got close to this person, I fell in love with this person. But that's not precisely what ultimately led me to leave, because I felt incredibly guilty and constantly kept telling myself that I really should let this person go, finally. But I found a feeling and a connection that I had never experienced before. Then we get to August 2015. I'm at a convention. The Jehovah's Witnesses organize 3 conventions every year. They gather people together. Why? because during the year, people start to have doubts, and at the convention, there's motivation, people get recharged. Moreover, when someone has doubts, a person who is inside the community isn't able to get out on their own. Why is that? Because they look at the others and think, I wouldn't want to be the only idiot here, right? Or maybe all these people are the idiots. Social proof, Robert Cialdini. So what happens at this point? I'm at the convention. I'm pissed off at the elders of my congregation, my community. I'm thinking about someone else. I'm finding satisfaction in my work. I don't appreciate what the Jehovah's Witnesses are teaching. So I'm there just to show my face. Because if I had distanced myself, I would have immediately faced ostracism. I wanted to avoid ostracism because it would have meant losing a number of my salespeople since they were Jehovah's Witnesses. It would have meant cutting ties with friends, basically. Then they subject you to very strong propaganda telling you, look, if you leave the witnesses, you'll come to a bad end because we are blessed by God. Outside, you find Satan. And so you are constantly bombarded with fake experiences, fake testimoniazo, made up stories that are published where they say, so-and-so left the witnesses, contracted AIDS, was raped, lost money, lost everything, and then decided to come back. So outside, there's only crime, war, and everyone is full of vices. People steal, people get drunk, do drugs, they're criminals, they're animals, basically. There's this fear of leaving, thinking, what if I leave and then lose everything? However, I'm at this conference, and during the afternoon session, a friend comes up to me in the hallway while the program is going on and says, Corrado. He knew about this difficult period I was going through. And he says to me, how's it going? How are you holding up? And I say, well, it's so. Listen, I've made a discovery, he tells me. Here we get to the disgusting part. What? In Australia, there's a huge pedophilia scandal involving Jehovah's Witnesses. Excuse me. Yes, there's a big scandal, and I say to him, my self-defense mechanism, injected by 25 years of antivirus, kicks in. I tell him, all right, but you also have to look at things, Then I say to him, surely the people who did these things will be expelled from the community. He says to me, look, it's more serious than you think. Now, there are two things that really bother me. I mean, you can do anything with me, really anything, and I'll tolerate it all, but there are two things I will never tolerate from anyone. And they are, one, violence against vulnerable people. So, abuse of minors, violence against women, violence against people who can't defend themselves, like the elderly. The bully of the moment, for me, needs to be removed. There's no excuse. Two, being made a fool of. When you make me believe one thing, and it's actually something else, I can't stand being made a fool of. So there are two things you must never do with me. These are my two fundamental values. Two, I have no tolerance for these. Zero tolerance. So I get home with my wife, and I look it up on the internet. I grab the iPad, search online and say, let's see, pedophilia, Jehovah's Witnesses. And newspaper articles in English start to come up where it's confirmed, where it's stated that in Australia, over 40 or 60 years, there had been more than one or zero cases of abuse reported to the Jehovah's Witness community, meaning by members reporting to the elders of the various congregations. But these were silenced. These investigations were carried out by the Australian Royal Commission. Australia is part of the Commonwealth, so it's one of the former British colonies. And why does this kind of scandal come to light in Australia? Because in the United States, a year earlier in 2014, Candace Conti set a precedent. This is a name you can look up on the internet. Candace Conti is a Jehovah's Witness girl who was abused by her stepfather when she was a minor, when she was little, obviously, right? She reported it. She tried to talk to the community about the fact that her stepfather was abusing her. But there is a rule among Jehovah's Witnesses that does call for pedophiles to be expelled, but they will only take on the review, the analysis, if there are two eyewitnesses to the incident. Candace Conti only had her stepfather who was abusing her. She didn't have two eyewitnesses. So she was abused the entire life. Until, as an adult, she reported her stepfather, who ended up in prison, and she also sued the Jehovah's Witnesses organization, the Watchtower, because they had prevented her from getting help. Because they required two witnesses. Even today, if you ask Jehovah's Witnesses, but how do you view pedophilia? They will tell you, God hates pedophilia. We hate pedophilia. Yes. But when do you report a pedophile? Well, when I know that someone is a pedophile. And when do you know that someone is a pedophile? If I have two eyewitnesses. So out of the thousands of cases like those in Australia, for example, many went unreported because there weren't two witnesses. And this is where Pandora's box starts to open. So Candace Conti wins the lawsuit against the Watchtower and receives compensation. In Commonwealth law, that is English law, American law. So common law, it's not civil law like we have here, right? Here we have statutory law and case law, meaning that depending on the court, there may be a preference for interpreting that statute one way or another. But in common law, what happens instead? If Candace Conti is awarded $10 million in damages, I'm just throwing out the number because I don't remember exactly, but the compensation was definitely in the millions. 10 or subsequent victims of abuse against the Watchtower will receive at least that kind of compensation. And at this point, upon uncovering the numbers related to abuse among Jehovah's Witnesses within their community numbers that had been hidden, there is a growing desire within the Commonwealth to investigate the situation even further. Thousands and thousands of cases of child abuse that were never reported to the authorities come to light. Why? Because the witnesses say, you wouldn't want to report a fellow brother in the community, would you? What kind of reproach would that bring upon the community? So, silence. But that person, my dear, dear elder, whom you judge by saying it would be better for him to move from one congregation to another, but whom you did not report to the authorities, is a predator, still at large, free to harm other children. But what happens then? The children who aren't witnesses aren't so lucky, are they? They're not chosen, they're not on the right path, they're not in the truth, it's their problem. So much so that that afternoon, when I read about this and discovered this crap, I took my wife and said to her, look, given that she didn't know English, she had to rely on what I showed her. She said to me, yes, okay, but they're not your children, Corrado, just leave it alone. Why? Because she was aware of what would happen if I started to speak out. And in fact, her response made me realize that she had a problem. I said to her, don't you realize what you just told me? You mean they're not our children? Do you realize that we carry on the name, that we go out preaching, proclaiming in the name of these people, this group, when in reality we're complicit in this mess? She didn't want to hear it. In fact, she reported me to the elders of the congregation saying, Corrado is going around saying these things. I tried to spread this news, but since most people didn't read English, they would say to me, well, we have to see if what you're telling me is true. First of all. Second, questioning an entire life like 25 years in my case, or for others, 30, 40, or even 50 years inside, saying, if what you're saying is true, I would have to give up everything. Was just too much for most people. So they refused to even consider it. I was up against a brick wall. They started to intimidate me, telling me to stop or else I would meet a bad end. At a certain point, I went through a series of trials where they tried to intimidate me, ordered me to stop, and I chose to leave. I said, I don't agree, and I don't want to be complicit in the abuse of minors. I'm against these things. My values are no longer yours because I don't need someone to show me in the Bible that pedophilia is wrong. By nature, I know it's wrong and disgusting. Just like killing someone or hurting someone. I don't need a law to tell me that killing is forbidden because otherwise you go to jail. I don't kill because it's wrong to take someone else's life. I know this by nature. Is it possible that this disgusting thing isn't obvious to you too? Nothing to be done? So I ultimately left the witnesses because I truly preferred to lose absolutely everything rather than be complicit in something so utterly disgusting. So that's how and why I left. They try to pressure me to come back. In a very underhanded way, for a while I was followed. My ex-wife would say to me, look, if you come back, we'll get back together. You'll see your grandchildren again. Because I had grandchildren on her side that I couldn't see. I haven't seen them since then. I haven't seen them anymore. But personal integrity is the most important thing to me. Truly being what we say we are is the most important thing. And never ever will I support something so disgusting. Never ever will I condone injustice. Never ever will I condone violence. Never. Losing everything was hard. It was tough because I lost a family. I found that door closed to me the very next day. A person who had shared life with me for 6.5 years suddenly became a stranger. So she stopped answering my calls, messages, nothing. Losing job opportunities because I had many salespeople who were Jehovah's Witnesses. Most of Theman, from the day after my expulsion, they disappeared. Finding myself completely alone, truly out in the wide, wide world, was incredibly hard. I had negative thoughts more than once, several times, because I kept saying, I can't do this. If it hadn't been for my parents, first and foremost, who took me in at home because I had nothing, I had no money, if it hadn't been for that person I fell in love with and stayed with for several years afterwards, if it hadn't been for a group of friends who were true friends, I wouldn't be here today. So I say thank you to these people because I owe you my life. It's clear that when I left that community, I also found myself with zero beliefs. I thought, so is everything they've told me up to now just a fairy tale? I mean, is the Bible not what it claims to be? And so I suddenly lost my sense of direction. So does God exist or not? I started to ask myself, why are we here? In other words, I went back to asking myself questions that for me had basically questions I had already made life choices about. I had chosen not to study. I had chosen certain jobs. I had turned down opportunities with girls. I had made drastic choices for my life. I always seemed like an idiot in the eyes of my school friends or classmates, my co-workers, because I always seemed strange, isolated. But I isolated myself because I chose to do so. I've missed out on opportunities in life that will never come back. I lost an adolescence full of guilt because my hormones pushed me to do things and to seek pleasure. And none of this can ever come back. So from that moment on, I made myself a promise. I will always do everything I can to help others who are struggling. I will always do everything I can to help those who are weak. I will always do everything I can to bring the truth to light. That is, for me, it's always been important to make choices out of consistency. I was there because I believed I was heading in a direction that would allow me to know God, to delve deeper into the truth and everything else. Losing everything wasn't something where I just said, all right, God doesn't exist, let's just forget about it. No, I said, I want to understand whether he exists or not. I want to understand whether there is consistency in the Bible or not. I want to dig deeper. And from that moment on, I set in motion a research and study plan like never before, in which I truly searched. I studied documents that are nearly impossible to find. I studied and researched like few others in order to find objective answers, truly objective answers. I no longer have any connection with any kind of religion, nor will I ever want to, because religion is not essential for living. It's just a way to manipulate people, to make them obey, and to make money, to fill the coffers. So this first video in this series allows me to explain where I started from. In other words, my ground zero. I will publish more videos in which I will explain the research I have done and the results and observations I have reached. So if you are interested in learning more, keep following me. Do me a favor, leave your opinion about this video in the comments below. Tell me what you think about my story and let me know which topics you'd like to learn more about. I'll see if there's a basis to create content in response to these questions. So if you want to stay updated on the videos I'll be posting about these topics, all you have to do is subscribe to my channel and keep following me.